Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from Yellow Cat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Retail workers, what's the best thing you've ever had a customer come up to you and say? I was working at an Pizza Hut and this group of guys came in demanding a discount, blah blah blah. They were totally unfounded and my boss wasn't there, so I couldn't just defer them to him. Anyways, this guy starts screaming at me that he's with some Muslim students organization and that means he gets a discount, which wasn't true, blah blah blah. After like 15 minutes, they give up and walk out. A cop was waiting until they left and came up to me. He said that they had been doing this at a few places. He technically couldn't arrest them for being annoying A-hats, but while they were in there yelling at me, he had their car towed for being parked illegally. That cop got free pizza. I was a cashier at a grocery store and I had a customer who complained about every single thing. That price is wrong. That's not the right kind of tomatoes. The grains in this sugar used to be smaller and now they're too big. I don't like having to select English. Finally, the woman leaves and I'm upset and a bit flustered. The next customer in line is a sweet old lady and she smiles and says, "Honey, there are two types of people in this world. Those that make your day better when they arrive and those that make your day better when you watch their leave." As long as I worked in retail, I never forgot that quote. Years ago, I had just moved to North Carolina and was working for Best Buy in Raleigh. A customer rushed up to me and asked, "Do you know if there's a time machine nearby?" I blinked at him and asked, "What year are you from?" What else do you ask in that situation? He looked at me like I was a complete fool and rushed off. I was kind of freaked out and mentioned this to a coworker. He pointed out that there was a chain of ATM machines called Time, Take Your Money Everywhere, that was fairly common in the region. I'm sure the guy tells the story of the idiot at Best Buy to this day. This was a strange experience, but honestly, it will probably stick with me for the rest of my life. I worked at a Borders Books for around 6 years, and in all that time, I'd met some incredible people and some really people, but one guy in particular will always stand out. The guy was in his late 30s, early 40s, and came into my store just around the time that we started getting busier for the approaching Thanksgiving/Christmas rush. I was in charge of all our multimedia sections in the store where they were big and needed a dedicated person, so I was hovering in the music section when he came in looking for a particular opera singer and a specific song. Over the years, I'd learned that this usually meant only one of three things. Either someone was getting married, having a birthday, or a funeral. I had also learned to not make assumptions about what it was for because that could easily lead to unnecessarily awkward moments. Anyways, back to my customer. He couldn't remember the girl's name, only that she was very young for an opera singer and had appeared on quite a few popular talk shows, etc. Usually this wasn't a difficult search, but for some reason it wasn't being nice that day, so it ended up taking much longer than I had anticipated. Fortunately, my managers had become accustomed to my customer service style, so when I felt I needed to, I would stay with the customer for as long as it took to make sure we exhausted every option. His search seemed important to him, so I stuck with it. We dug through pages and pages of opera collections, new releases, talk show guest lists, and on until I was finally running out of small talk, so inevitably, we came around to why he was looking for this particular piece of music. Apparently, it was his mom's favorite and she had just passed away 2 days before. He nearly broke down telling me that searching for this music was the only thing keeping him sane. We stopped searching for a while and stood in the classical music section talking about his mother and how close they were, the things they had done together when his dad had passed in order to keep busy, traveling, etc. Sorry, tearing up as I write this. During this entire exchange, we never introduced ourselves by name. To this day, I don't know who he was or even really remember the specifics of what we talked about. We jumped around from subject to subject until we were both in tears from laughing or remembering people we had lost. Another long story, but my fiance had passed away a couple years before this, so that was still somewhat fresh in my mind. At any rate, he realized that we had been talking for a long time, so he apologized profusely for taking up so much of my time and thanked me for trying to help him find the piece of music he needed. This was the third or fourth place he'd been so far, but now he would let me get back to work. I felt awful that we hadn't found what he was after, so I asked if he was going to be around for a bit longer and figured there was no harm in just browsing through the CDs in case he got lucky. We shook hands and said goodbye, and then I did what any well-meaning bookseller would do and ducked in back to quickly scour the internet in a last-ditch attempt to find that cursed CD. I finally succeeded in finding Charlotte Church Voice of an Angel, which luckily we had in stock, and ran out of the back office to find the guy who was already in line with a different classical CD that had Ave Maria on it, the specific piece he wanted. I'll always remember the look on his face when I asked him if this was the artist he was looking for, kinda what I imagine people look like when Ed McMahon shows up at their door, and he was happy beyond words. We took it to one of the listening stations in the store so he could hear it just to be absolutely sure, and as soon as he started tearing up, I knew he had hit the jackpot. I took him to one of the empty registers, and we chatted a little more while I rang up the CD. Came to like $15 to $16, and without any explanation, he starts pulling 20s out of his wallet and putting them on the counter. I start trying to explain that I only need the first one, and at first he muttered something I didn't hear, so I took one of the 20s and finished the transaction. He then scoops up the almost awkwardly large pile of money on the counter and hands it to me. I asked him what it was for, to which he replied, thank you so much." The rest of it was a little unintelligible, but I heard him say how happy he was. After shoving the money into my hand and me trying to tell him politely that I couldn't accept it, he grabbed his bag, said thank you again, and left the store, leaving me with what ended up being a little over $300. I was freaking out a little bit at this point, not sure what to do with this huge wad of cash in my hand and not sure who to tell. After being a little frantic, I decided I should donate it, and since we had a book drive going on at the time, I called over a supervisor and told him what happened. He agreed and we started ringing up bargain books. After about $120 or so, he totaled the transaction and told me to keep the rest. I ended up buying the staff coffee from our cafe, and when my dad picked me up that night from work, we went and got dinner, and I was having some money troubles at that point, so the rest of his gift paid off 2 bills. When I worked as a cashier at Target, we had these stickers that had a cartoony version of the Target dog sitting in a shopping cart wearing a seatbelt. We were supposed to give them to kids sitting in the carts, but I just gave them to well-behaved kids. This one girl and her mother came into my line buying school supplies for the following year. The girl was taking all of their stuff out of the cart and handing it to me instead of putting it on the conveyor belt for me. While I was slowly getting buried in a mountain of folders, markers, and stickers, I thought it was too cute to ask her to stop. Once I'd scanned and bagged everything, her mother gave her a $100 bill to give to me. When I handed her back the change, I gave her a sticker. I said to her, "That's for being so helpful." As I was helping the next customer, I noticed the mother and daughter scouring through their bag and looking at the receipt. As I was working, I was nervous that I had messed something up. Suddenly, I felt someone tapping me from behind. It was the little girl. She handed me something and said, "That's for being so helpful." I looked into my hand and there was a small sticker that said, "Great job." I proudly wore that sticker in my uniform that day and I saved it for over a year. That probably made my short retail career. I worked at a gas station for a while, which had an attached car wash. It was Labor Day, the crowds were thick, the weather was nice, and we were busting our butts. Washing 50 cars an hour is backbreaking work and leaves you sweaty and covered in car soap scum. 3 of us worked the car wash, a prepper, and 2 dryers. Usually we got tips, about $1 per person. Nothing great, but an extra $20 to $30 never hurt anyone. Anyway, this guy comes through the line and we recognize him. He's got a nice Mercedes and came through pretty regularly, about once every 2 weeks. When we finished his car, he handed me an envelope and said, "You guys deserve this. You work hard and that should be rewarded." Inside were 3 $100 bills, 3 $15 gift cards to Blockbuster, and a thank you card. We were floored. We also probably spent the next 2 months working harder than ever, partly to make sure we deserved it, and partly to see if it would happen again. My normal greeting for a customer is, "Hello, how are you today?" I find it less awkward than silence. I had been using this when I was about 16 years old and working at a garden center. One day I greeted a customer as usual, but he immediately demanded to see my manager. Confused and scared, I called my manager to the front, expecting to get in trouble for something. Turns out the guy freaked out about how happy he was to have the youth of America still using friendly customer service and showing interest in their customers. This guy demanded to my manager that I get a raise and also slipped me a huge tip under the table. Ever since then, I smile and greet everyone. My husband sells specialty cheeses. One day, a middle-aged woman was having a hard time finding some fancy pants buffalo milk cheese, and my husband had just happened to get an order in for it that day. She was thrilled. "You're such a good boy," she said. Then she asked for a few more suggestions for a cheese platter. He put one together for her. She kept saying, "What a good boy," and that sort of thing. My husband, who has a touch of anxiety, was horrified and had no idea what to do. At the end of the interaction, she rubbed one of his shoulders and said, "You made mommy very happy today," winked, and then left. Once he calmed down, he realized it was probably one of the best, most hilarious interactions he's had at work. Working at Kroger's my last year of high school, and this old white woman who is clearly drunk got in my line with like a gallon of the most expensive wine we carried. We weren't supposed to sell it to people who were obviously already drunk, but quite frankly, I was going away to school in about 3 weeks and I gave no Fs. We finished the transaction and she starts beaming at me like an effing hyena. She asked me, did I have a boyfriend, and I said no and smiled. She must have missed the rainbow tattooed on my wrist, and then the conversation went as follows. Her: "Girls should have boyfriends to buy them diamonds. My husband is out buying me diamonds right now." At this point, I actually have to look at her, and she looks like money. But anyway, me: "Oh, well, that's very nice. What's the occasion?" Her: "That he's a lying, cheating workaholic B." Me: "Well, he sucks then, cheating on a young, fine lady such as yourself." Her: "All he cares about is money." Some sobbing starts. I stand there awkwardly. I think I touched her shoulder. It was a weird experience. Her: "Take this bracelet. I know it costs a lot of money. You don't have to keep it. I just want to hurt him, you know?" I don't know. Me: "Sure." And she leaves. I kept it for a week in case she returned wanting her bracelet. On the last day of that week, she returned to my line dripping in some kind of pink stones and has conversation with me. Doesn't ask for it back, but does compliment me on my nice jewelries and strokes my hand. I had it appraised the next day and was $1,675 richer when I left the jewelry store. I probably got D'd on that deal, but I was going to school and needed quick money. I lived on that money my freshman year. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, the likes, and the comments. See you in the next video.